The final signature on the document was a cruel flourish, a flick of the wrist that severed a decade of shared life. Isabel Thorne, soon to be just Thorne again, pushed the paper across the polished mahogany of the lawyer's conference table. Her smile was a masterpiece of condescending pity, a look she had perfected over years of marriage to a man she considered her social and intellectual inferior. "There," she said, her voice smooth as polished marble. "It's done. The firm is mine. The house is mine. The assets are secured under the Thorne corporate umbrella." She leaned back, a queen surveying a conquered territory. Her father, Marcus Thorne, sat beside her, a bulldog of a man whose expensive suit could not conceal his brutish satisfaction. He nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture in Liam's direction. Liam Finch said nothing. He simply looked at the document, his face a calm, unreadable mask. He had fought, not for the business he had essentially built from the ground up, but for a fair valuation. He had been denied at every turn. Marcus's lawyers had buried him in paperwork. His resources bled dry, his spirit systematically crushed. They had painted him as a freeloader, a man who had married into wealth and was now trying to steal it. The narrative was as false as it was effective. Now, about the remaining marital property, Isabel's lawyer, a man with a face like a clenched fist, continued, looking at his list. "There is the matter of a few digital assets, specifically several domain names registered under Mr. Finch's name during the marriage." Isabel waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, for heaven's sake, let him have them. They're worthless." She looked directly at Liam, her eyes glittering with malice. "All those silly, sentimental names for projects you dreamed up in your notebooks but never had the courage to build. Consider them a parting gift, a reminder of all your unrealized potential." Marcus grunted in agreement. Sentimental nonsense. The boy was always a dreamer, not a doer. Liam's gaze remained steady. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. Inside, a cold, quiet anger burned, but on the surface, he was a placid lake. He knew the one she was talking about, the one she had mocked the most. Nexus.com. He had registered it 12 years ago, 2 years before he'd even met her, a name that represented his core philosophy of connecting ideas and people. She'd always hated it. "Which ones specifically?" Liam's lawyer asked, trying to salvage some small victory. "All of them," Isabel said magnanimously, "but especially that ridiculous Nexus one. He was so proud of it." She laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed the click of her pen. "You can have it, Liam. Hold on to it. Maybe one day it'll be worth the $20 a year you pay to keep it." Liam finally moved. He reached into his worn leather briefcase and pulled out a simple, crisp manila envelope. He slid it across the table to his lawyer. "Please add an addendum specifying that the domain name Nexus.com, registration number 785-B1, is my sole and separate property, relinquished by Miss Thorne freely and without consideration." Isabel's lawyer raised an eyebrow at the specificity but shrugged. It was a worthless asset. Giving it away with such formal language only highlighted the pathetic nature of the scrap Liam was clinging to. It was a final, satisfying humiliation. They drafted the addendum. Isabel signed it without reading, her signature another arrogant slash of ink. She stood, smoothing down her designer dress. "Well, Liam, it's been an education." The insult hung in the air. "I do hope you land on your feet, though from this height, it's a long way down." She and her father swept out of the room, leaving Liam alone with his lawyer in the scent of their expensive, cruel perfume. His lawyer sighed, looking at his client with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry, Liam. We did everything we could. They just had more power." Liam nodded slowly. He picked up his copy of the agreement and the newly signed addendum. He placed the addendum back inside the manila envelope. His fingers brushed against the thick paper of the certificate already inside. the original registration document from 12 years ago. He felt its weight, its reality. Isabel thought she had won. She thought she had taken everything. She had taken the business he had named Finch and Thorne Creative, a name he'd insisted on to honor their partnership, a name she was already planning to erase. She had taken the home he had helped design. She had taken their shared history and rewritten it into a story of her benevolence and his failure. She had left him with what she believed was a digital ghost, a string of 5 letters she'd valued at less than a tank of gas. She was confident. She was triumphant. What she didn't know was that for the last 6 months, Liam hadn't been fighting for the business. He had been fighting for this single piece of paper. He hadn't been talking to divorce attorneys. He had been talking to international tech brokers. He already had a standing offer for Nexus.com, a verbal agreement waiting only for this signature to become a formal, binding contract, an offer for $6.8 million. This meeting wasn't his surrender. It was the final move in a chess game Isabel didn't even know she was playing. The war was over, and he had just won. Before we dive into how this all unraveled and how Liam turned his quiet dignity into devastating victory, I have to ask, where are you all watching from today? It's incredible to see how far these stories reach. Let me know in the comments. And if you believe in the power of patience and integrity and enjoy seeing arrogance get its just desserts, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories just like this. You won't want to miss what happens next. The rot had set in long before the lawyers were called. It had begun as a series of small fissures in the foundation of their marriage, tiny cracks of disrespect that Liam, in his optimism, had tried to patch with patience and love. He remembered one evening, about a year before the end, that now seemed like a perfect, painful miniature of their entire relationship. It was Marcus Thorne's 70th birthday. The party was held at the Thorne family estate, a sprawling mansion that seemed designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. The air was thick with the scent of money, old and new. Men in bespoke suits talked about mergers and acquisitions, while their wives, draped in jewels, discussed charity galas and trips to Monaco. Liam had always felt like an exhibit in this world, Isabel's architect husband, a curiosity she would occasionally present with a mixture of pride and apology. That night, the apology was gone, replaced by a sharp, cutting disdain. Liam had just successfully led the design and launch of a major rebranding for a multi-billion-dollar client, a project that had consumed him for a year and had brought their firm, Finch and Thorne Creative, unprecedented acclaim. It was his concept, his strategy, his execution. Isabel had handled the client relationship, leveraging her father's contacts to get them in the door. It was supposed to be their greatest joint triumph. He was standing with a small group of Marcus's business associates, men who measured the world in quarterly earnings reports. One of them, a man named Henderson, clapped Liam on the shoulder. "Remarkable work on the OmniCorp project, Finch. Truly. That new brand identity is a game changer. You must be proud." Liam smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "Thank you, Arthur. It was a team effort, but I'm very pleased with the outcome." Before he could say more, Isabel materialized at his side, a champagne flute in her hand. She looped her arm through his, a gesture that looked like affection but felt like a leash. "Oh, Liam is just being modest," she said, her voice tinkling like ice in a glass. "He comes up with the most wonderful little drawings, but of course it takes a real business mind to turn scribbles into strategy. That's where I come in." The men chuckled, a patronizing sound. The compliment from Henderson evaporated, recontextualized as praise for Isabel's brilliant management of her creative, but ultimately unserious, husband. Liam felt the familiar heat rise in his neck, a mixture of anger and humiliation. He looked at Isabel, but she was already turning to the group, launching into an exaggerated story about how she saved the project from one of Liam's more esoteric ideas. Later, Marcus cornered him by the grand fireplace. He held a glass of scotch, swirling the amber liquid as he spoke. "I hear you're feeling pretty good about the Omnicorp deal," he began, his tone avuncular but his eyes cold. "It was a big win for the firm, Marcus," Liam said evenly. "For Isabel," Marcus corrected him. "My daughter has a talent for finding diamonds in the rough and polishing them. She saw potential in you, Liam. Don't ever forget that. This firm, this life, it's all built on a thorn foundation. You're just living in it." The implication was clear. You are not the architect. You are a tenant, and your lease is conditional. That was the night Liam went home and for the first time looked up the old registration documents for Nexus.com. He had purchased it in his early 20s, a broke, ambitious student with a vision for a company that would one day connect disparate fields, art, technology, commerce, into a single, meaningful whole, a nexus point. He'd paid the renewal fee every year since, a small ritual of faith in a future he still believed in. Isabel had found the renewal charge on a credit card statement years ago. "What is this nexus nonsense?" she'd asked, her nose wrinkled in distaste. "It's a domain I own," he'd explained, "for a future project." "A future project?" she had scoffed. "Liam, we have a real firm, Finch and Thorne. Stop wasting money on these pipe dreams." It's embarrassing. He had transferred the billing to his personal account after that, hiding the small expense like a guilty secret. Now, sitting in his home office, the sounds of the party still echoing downstairs, he held the digital certificate. It felt like the only thing in the entire house that was truly his. The house belonged to her family. The business, he was now realizing, was only his in name. His contributions were being systematically erased, reframed as the whimsical noodlings of an artful subordinate. He looked at the name, Nexus.com, a single, powerful word. A generic term, yet one of the rarest commodities on the internet, a one-word .com domain. He had acquired it in the digital Wild West days, when such gems could still be found. He had always known it had inherent value, but he'd never thought of it in purely monetary terms. It was about the idea. But that night, humiliated and iced out by his wife and her father, he started to think differently. He opened a private browser window and began to research the market for premium domains. He saw the multi-million-dollar sales for names like Voice.com, Ice.com, Connect.com. He saw the brokers who handled these quiet, high-stakes transactions. For the first time, he saw Nexus.com not just as a dream, but as a key to an escape hatch he hadn't known he was building. He didn't act on it then. He still hoped he could save his marriage, that he could make Isabel see him, truly see him, as an equal partner. But he saved the research. He created a file. And in the back of his mind, a new strategy began to form. A quiet, patient plan for a future he might have to build alone. The humiliation at the party was not the end. It was the beginning of his secret education. He was no longer just an architect of brands. He was becoming the architect of his own liberation. The weeks following the divorce were a study in contrasts. Isabel's life, at least on social media, was an explosion of triumphant color. There were photos of a celebratory dinner with the caption, "To new beginnings and shedding dead weight." There was the grand unveiling of the firm's new name, Thorne Creative, with a sleek, minimalist logo she claimed to have designed herself. The Finch was gone, erased as if it had never been there. The accompanying press release described it as a bold refocusing of the brand's core vision under the singular leadership of Isabel Thorne. Friends, clients, and sycophants flooded her comments with praise. "So proud of you. You're an inspiration, Isabel." Finally, the credit goes where it's due. Meanwhile, Liam's world had shrunk to the four walls of a small, sparsely furnished apartment on the other side of town. He had his clothes, his books, and his laptop. The grand views of the city from his old home office were replaced by a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. In the first few days, it was a crushing, heavy blanket. He felt the full weight of the loss, not of the money or the status, but of the future he had believed in. He had loved Isabel, or at least the woman he thought she was in the beginning. He grieved for that version of her, and for the man he had been when he was with her, hopeful, trusting, and a little naive. But grief is a process, and for a strategic mind like Liam's, it was also a phase to be analyzed and moved through. After allowing himself exactly 1 week of quiet despair, he opened his laptop. He didn't look at Isabel's social media. He didn't dwell on the past. He opened the encrypted file he had created a year ago, the one titled Contingency. Inside was his research on premium domain sales and a list of the top 3 brokerage firms in the world. He spent a day updating his research, noting recent sales and market trends. The demand for single-word, generic .coms was higher than ever, driven by tech giants and global brands looking for ultimate authority in their digital space. Nexus was more than just a good name. It was a perfect name for a dozen different industries: technology, finance, logistics, social media. He drafted a careful, professional email. It was concise, giving only the necessary details. He was the sole, verified owner of Nexus.com, and he was discreetly exploring the possibility of a sale. He sent it to the top firm on his list, a boutique brokerage based in Hong Kong known for handling 9-figure digital asset transactions. Chen and Associates. He didn't expect an immediate reply. These firms were notoriously selective. But 24 hours later, an email appeared in his inbox. It was from a senior partner named David Chen. The email was brief. It expressed polite interest and requested a secure video call to verify ownership and discuss his intentions. Liam felt a spark, the first real flicker of something other than pain. It was the feeling of a gear engaging, of a complex machine humming to life. He spent the next day preparing for the call. He set up in his small apartment, making sure the background was neutral and professional. He had his original registration documents, the signed divorce addendum, and his passport ready for verification. When he connected the call, he was greeted by a calm, composed man in his late 50s. Mr. Chen was all business, but there was a kindness in his eyes. He listened intently as Liam explained the situation, omitting the emotional details of the divorce and focusing only on the legal facts. He had clear, unencumbered title to the asset. Mr. Chen asked him to hold the documents up to the camera. He examined the registration certificate, the addendum, Liam's ID. His firm's legal team would do a deeper dive, but his initial assessment was positive. "Mr. Finch," he said, his voice measured, "a domain of this quality does not come to market often. It is what we call a category killer. It confers instant authority and credibility. We believe we can facilitate a highly lucrative sale." He then asked a question that shifted the ground beneath Liam's feet. "Do you have a specific valuation in mind?" Liam had run the numbers. He had seen the comparable sales. He took a breath. "Based on my research, I believe a valuation in the range of $5 to $7 million is realistic." Mr. Chen did not blink. He nodded slowly. "Your research is sound, Mr. Finch. In fact, it may be conservative. We have a client, a global technology conglomerate, that has been searching for a name of this caliber for their new flagship platform. They have authorized us to be very aggressive. I believe an offer in the high end of your range is not only possible, but likely. But they will require absolute discretion in a swift, clean transaction." Liam's heart hammered in his chest, but his voice remained steady. "Discretion is precisely what I'm looking for, Mr. Chen." "Very good," the broker replied. "Let our team complete the due diligence. We will be in touch within the week to formalize our representation agreement." The call ended. Liam sat in the silent apartment, the screen dark. He looked at the manila envelope on his small desk. Isabel was out there, celebrating her victory in a world of glass and steel. She believed he was crushed, destitute, a ghost of a man living in the ruins of a life she had graciously allowed him to have. She had no idea that in this small, quiet room, he was holding a key, and he was about to turn it. The game was afoot, and the board was finally, entirely his own. 2 months passed. For Isabel Thorne, they were a period of frantic, productive energy. Thorne Creative was her empire, and she was its undisputed empress. She hired new staff, young, hungry creatives who were dazzled by her name and her confidence. She redesigned the office, purging every last trace of Liam's somber, academic aesthetic and replacing it with stark white walls, neon art, and glass furniture. It looked less like a creative agency and more like a high-end laboratory for branding. Her biggest project was the launch of a new proprietary software platform. It was a client management and workflow system designed for creative agencies. It was Liam's brainchild, a project he had been developing for years, the software architecture nearly complete before the divorce. Isabel, of course, presented it as her own innovation. She called it Thornflow. The development team hit a predictable snag. "We need a web address for the platform, Ms. Thorne," the lead developer, a young man named Kevin, said during a tense project meeting. "Well, get one," Isabel said, annoyed. "Thornflow.com." Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "That's taken, Ms. Thorne. So is thornflow.net and .io. We could do thorn-flow.com or getthornflow.com." Isabel's face tightened. The suggestions sounded clumsy, desperate. They lacked the clean, premium feel she was trying to cultivate. No hyphens, no verbs. It has to be clean. Find something else. They spent a week generating alternatives. Thorn Suite, Thorn OS, Creative Thorn. Every simple, elegant.com was already registered. They were left with a list of awkward, multi-word options that reeked of second best. Isabel grew more and more frustrated. The entire project was predicated on an image of seamless, effortless superiority. A clunky domain name would undermine that before they even launched. It was during a late-night brainstorming session, surrounded by whiteboards filled with rejected names, that the memory surfaced. It came to her not as an idea, but as an irritation, like a piece of grit in her eye. Nexus, the stupid, sentimental name Liam had clung to for years. A name she had mocked relentlessly. Nexus. She typed it into her browser. A blank placeholder page appeared. Then she typed thornflow.com and saw an active, if ugly, website for a plumbing company in Ohio. The contrast was stark. Nexus was clean. It was powerful. It meant a central or focal point. It was, she realized with a surge of profound annoyance, the perfect name for their platform. It was 1,000 times better than Thornflow. The fact that it was Liam's idea, a remnant of the man she had so thoroughly vanquished, was infuriating. But Isabel was a pragmatist. Her desire for the perfect brand was stronger than her contempt for her ex-husband. She saw an opportunity, not for reconciliation, but for another victory. She imagined Liam, holed up in his sad little apartment, probably struggling to pay his bills. He would be desperate for cash. The domain was useless to him, a digital paperweight. She could acquire it from him for a pittance, a few $1,000s perhaps. It would be an act of charity, really. She would be rescuing him from his own foolishness, paying him for a silly idea she could turn into a multi-million-dollar product. The narrative was perfect. She didn't wait. She found his new number and called him. He answered on the second ring. "Liam Finch." His voice was calm, steady, annoyingly so. "Liam, it's Isabel." She didn't wait for a pleasantry. "I'll get straight to the point. I'm launching a new platform, and I've decided I want to use a name you once registered. Nexus." She could almost hear his stillness on the other end of the line. "I see," he said after a moment. "It's a silly name, but it has a certain ring to it for this particular application," she continued, already downplaying its value. "You're obviously not doing anything with it, and I imagine you could use the money. I'm prepared to offer you $5,000 for it. That's a significant return on your $20 a year investment, you have to admit. She waited for the grateful, surprised acceptance. She waited for him to stumble over his words, thanking her for the lifeline. Instead, there was another pause. When he spoke, his voice was still perfectly level, without a trace of anger or excitement. "Thank you for the offer, Isabel, but I'm not interested in selling at this time." Isabel was so taken aback she almost laughed. "Not interested? Liam, don't be foolish. What could you possibly do with it? This is a generous offer. It's $5,000 for doing nothing. You won't get a better one." "Nevertheless," he said, his tone infuriatingly polite, "the domain is not for sale." "I'm not asking, Liam. I'm telling you," she snapped, her patience gone. "That name was conceived while we were married, while you were working at my firm. It's a company asset I overlooked during the settlement. I'm giving you a chance to do this amicably. Take the $5,000, or my lawyers will be in touch." This, she thought, was the winning move. The threat. The reminder of the power imbalance that had always defined their relationship. But Liam's response was not what she expected. There was no fear, no capitulation. There was only a quiet, almost chilling finality. "Isabel," he said, and for the first time she detected a note of something hard as steel beneath the calm surface. "If you and your lawyers feel you have a claim, you know where to find me. Have them send a formal proposal. We can discuss it in a professional setting." And then he hung up. Isabel stared at her phone, her knuckles white. The audacity, the sheer unbelievable nerve of him. He was supposed to be broken. He was supposed to be grateful. Instead, he had challenged her. He had invited a fight. Fine, she thought, a cold fury rising within her. If it's a fight he wants, it's a fight he'll get. She immediately called her father. "Marcus," she said, her voice tight with rage. "Liam is trying to extort me. We need to crush him. For good." She had no idea she wasn't declaring war. She was walking straight into a perfectly set trap. The official letter from Thorn Creative's legal team arrived a week later. It was everything Liam had expected. Arrogant, threatening, and built on a foundation of legal quicksand. It claimed that Nexus.com, despite being registered by Liam 2 years prior to his marriage to Isabel, was a de facto marital asset because he had contemplated its use for projects related to Finch and Thorn Creative. It accused him of fraudulent concealment of the asset's potential value during the divorce settlement, a claim dripping with irony as they had been the ones to declare it worthless. The letter concluded with a formal and insulting offer. They would pay him his original registration fee plus 10% for a total of approximately $22 in exchange for the immediate transfer of the domain. If he refused, they would file a lawsuit seeking not only the domain, but also punitive damages for his bad faith conduct. It was a classic Marcus Thorne strategy: overwhelm, intimidate, and crush. They assumed Liam was alone, undefended, and would crumble under the threat of another costly legal battle. They were wrong on all counts. Liam read the letter twice, a faint, humorless smile playing on his lips. They were doing exactly what he had anticipated. Their greed and arrogance were his greatest allies. He forwarded the letter to 2 people. The first was his own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Elena Rios, whom he had retained with a small portion of the advance he'd received from Mr. Chen's firm for exclusive representation. The second was to Mr. Chen himself, with a simple note: "The complication we discussed has begun. I will handle it." Mr. Chen's reply was immediate. "Keep us apprised, Mr. Finch. Our client is still exceptionally motivated. A clean title is paramount. Do what you must." Elena's advice was clear. They have no case, Liam, and they know it. The addendum from the divorce is ironclad. This is pure intimidation. They expect you to fold. So we don't fold. We call their bluff. That's when Liam put the next phase of his plan into motion. He instructed Elena to reply to Thorn Creative's lawyers. Her letter was the polar opposite of theirs. It was calm, professional, and firm. It politely rejected their offer and refuted their claims, citing the specific clause in the divorce decree that Isabel herself had signed. However, the letter concluded with an unexpected gesture of goodwill. "Despite the baseless nature of your claims," Elena wrote, "Mr. Finch is a reasonable man. He is willing to meet in person to discuss a potential resolution that might be mutually beneficial. He suggests a meeting in 2 weeks' time at a neutral location." Isabel and Marcus saw this as a sign of weakness. "He's cracking," Marcus boomed over the phone to Isabel. "He knows he can't afford to fight us. He wants to negotiate his surrender. We've got him." Isabel agreed. "He's going to ask for his $5,000 back. Maybe 10. Let's make him sweat." They readily accepted the meeting, their confidence soaring. They imagined Liam walking into a room, hat in hand, ready to beg for a slightly less insulting offer. They were preparing for a surrender. Liam was preparing for a checkmate. In the 2 weeks leading up to the meeting, Liam was a model of quiet, methodical preparation. He didn't waste energy on anger or anxiety. He focused on the details. He rented a state-of-the-art boardroom in a downtown office tower, a place of unimpeachable neutrality and professionalism. It was spacious, with a large oak table, comfortable leather chairs, and a high-definition video conferencing system. The cost for a 3-hour rental was more than his first month's rent, but he considered it a crucial investment. The environment, the stage, had to be perfect. He coordinated with Mr. Chen, confirming the time for the video call and ensuring the technology was compatible. Mr. Chen was impressed by Liam's strategic handling of the situation. "You are a man who understands leverage, Mr. Finch," he had said in their last call. "It is a rare quality." Liam also spent time preparing himself. He went over the events of the last few years, not with emotion, but with the cool detachment of an auditor. He made a list, not on paper but in his mind. It was a list of grievances, a catalog of every dismissal, every condescending remark, every moment of casual cruelty. From Marcus's pronouncement that he was just a tenant in their lives, to Isabel's mocking laughter about his sentimental nonsense. He wasn't preparing this list for revenge. He was preparing it as evidence. It was the why. It was the moral foundation for the action he was about to take. The day before the meeting, he took the manila envelope from his desk. Inside were 3 documents: the original domain registration from 12 years ago, the signed addendum from the divorce, and the now formalized, notarized offer from Mr. Chen's anonymous client, contingent on the transfer of a clear title. The offer was for $6,800,000. He held the papers in his hand. They felt solid, real. For months, he had been living in a state of quiet duality, the broke, defeated ex-husband on the surface, and the architect of a multi-million-dollar deal underneath. Tomorrow, the 2 worlds would collide. Tomorrow, the quiet part would be said out loud. He went to bed early and slept soundly. He was not nervous. He was ready. The storm was coming, and he was not hiding from it. He was the one who had summoned the clouds, and he knew exactly where the lightning was going to strike. The boardroom was on the 40th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, almost godlike view of the city. Liam arrived 30 minutes early. He checked the video conferencing system, ensuring a stable connection. He arranged 4 bottles of chilled water and 4 glasses on the vast oak table. He sat down in the chair at the head of the table, the one facing the door, and waited. The quiet hum of the building's ventilation system was the only sound. Isabel and Marcus arrived precisely on time, flanking their lawyer, Mr. Davies. They strode into the room with the unshakable confidence of people who had never lost a fight they truly cared about winning. Isabel was wearing a severe, dark gray power suit, her hair pulled back tightly. She looked at Liam sitting alone at the head of the table, and a smirk touched her lips. To her, he looked small and isolated against the vastness of the room. Marcus didn't even look at Liam. He surveyed the room with a grunt of approval. "Good choice of venue, Finch," he said, his voice booming slightly in the quiet space. "At least you have good taste in boardrooms. Last act of a desperate man trying to project power he doesn't have." They took their seats opposite him, a formidable, united front. Their lawyer opened a pristine leather briefcase and began to arrange files on the table, a piece of theater designed to intimidate. "Mr. Finch," Davies began, his tone cold and formal. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I hope it's a sign that you have come to your senses. My clients are prepared to be reasonable, but let's be clear about the situation you are in." For the next 20 minutes, Davies laid out their case. It was the same blustering argument from the letter, now delivered with theatrical gravitas. He spoke of intellectual property developed within a marital partnership, of Liam's fiduciary duty to the firm, and of the overwhelming evidence that Nexus.com was intrinsically linked to the business Isabel now owned. It was a masterclass in legal fiction, delivered with absolute conviction. Liam listened. He did not interrupt. He did not fidget. His hands rested calmly on the table in front of him. His gaze remained fixed on Davies, attentive and patient. His silence was unnerving. It wasn't the silence of a man who is intimidated. It was the silence of a man who is waiting for his opponent to exhaust himself. When Davies finished, Marcus leaned forward, his beefy hands clasped on the table. "Let me put it in plain English for you, son. You have two choices. You can sign that domain over to us right now, and we'll walk away. We might even be generous enough to give you the 10,000 you were hoping to get. Or we can take you to court. We will bury you, Liam. We will drain every last penny you have, and then we will take the domain anyway. And when your name is dragged through the mud, don't come crying to us. This is your last chance to walk away with a scrap of dignity." Isabel, who had been watching Liam's face for any sign of a crack, finally spoke. Her voice was softer than her father's, but laced with a more personal venom. "Liam, just stop this. It's pathetic. You're clinging to a word you could never have done anything with on your own. I am offering you a way to be a part of something successful, even in this small, insignificant way. Take the money. Be smart for once in your life." The room fell silent. The threats and insults hung in the air. They had said their piece. They had laid all their cards on the table, confident they held a royal flush. They looked at him, expecting him to capitulate, to bargain, to beg. Liam took a slow, deliberate sip of water. He placed the glass down with a soft click. He looked at Marcus, then at Davies, and finally, his eyes settled on Isabel. "Thank you all for sharing your perspective," he said, his voice as calm as the still surface of the water in his glass. "I've listened patiently. Now you will listen to me." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The sudden shift in authority was palpable. It was no longer a negotiation. It was a sentencing. "First, let's dispense with the legal fictions," he said, his eyes locked on Davies. "The domain Nexus.com was registered by me on May 14th, 2008. I have the original, time-stamped registration certificate right here." He gestured to the manila envelope by his hand, but didn't open it. "I did not meet your client, Ms. Thorne, until August of 2010. The asset predates our relationship entirely. Furthermore, during our divorce settlement, your client and her counsel identified this asset, declared it worthless, and signed a legally binding addendum relinquishing all present and future claims to it. Your case has no merit, and you know it. This meeting is an act of intimidation, and frankly, it's an embarrassment to your profession." Davies's face flushed a deep red. Before he could sputter a response, Liam turned his attention to Marcus. "Marcus, you've spoken a lot about what you've given me, a life, a foundation. You believe I was a tenant in a house you built, but a house is just a structure. The value comes from what's inside. I brought creativity, strategy, and countless late nights to that firm. I built its reputation project by project, idea by idea. You provided the capital, and for that, you were well compensated. But you cannot buy ideas, and you cannot demand respect. You've mistaken your wealth for wisdom for far too long. Marcus's jaw clenched, a vein throbbing in his temple. He looked like he was about to explode. Finally, Liam looked at Isabel. His voice softened but lost none of its steel. And you, Isabel, you call me pathetic for clinging to a word. You say I could never have done anything with it. You're right, in a way. I couldn't have done anything with it with you. Because to do something great, you need a partner who believes in you, who doesn't see your dreams as sentimental nonsense, who doesn't mock your ideas in front of others to make themselves feel powerful. He paused, letting his words sink in. The confidence was draining from their faces, replaced by a mixture of fury and confusion. They were no longer in control. You have fundamentally misunderstood the situation, Liam said quietly. You came here today believing this was a negotiation about how much you would pay me. You believe the question is what this domain is worth to you. He leaned forward slightly. You are mistaken. The question is not what it's worth to you. The question is what it's worth to them. With that, he reached over and tapped a key on the laptop in front of him. The large screen on the wall, which had been displaying the boardroom's logo, flickered to life. The calm, professional face of Mr. David Chen appeared, life-sized, his backdrop a stunning view of the Hong Kong harbor. Good morning, Mr. Chen said, his voice crisp and clear through the room's speakers. Or, I suppose, good afternoon to you all. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the video conference connection. Isabel, Marcus, and their lawyer stared at the screen, their faces a tableau of disbelief. They didn't know who this man was, but his calm authority and the opulent background spoke of a world of power far beyond their own. Who the hell is this? Marcus finally growled, his voice losing its booming confidence. Liam answered, his tone still quiet and measured. This is Mr. David Chen. He is a senior partner at Chen & Associates, a premier global brokerage firm specializing in high-value digital assets. Mr. Chen gave a slight, polite bow of his head. A pleasure to meet you, even under these adversarial circumstances. Isabel found her voice, though it was strained. What is this, Liam? What kind of stunt are you trying to pull? It's not a stunt, Isabel, Liam said. It's a clarification. You came here to threaten me into selling my property for $10,000. You accused me of hiding its value. The truth is you never bothered to understand its value in the first place. I, on the other hand, did my research. He turned his attention back to the screen. Mr. Chen, would you be so kind as to inform Mr. Thorne and Miss Thorne about the current status of the asset in question, Nexus.com? Mr. Chen looked directly into the camera, his expression impassive. Certainly, Mr. Finch. Chen & Associates was retained by Mr. Finch approximately 2 months ago to represent him in the potential sale of the premium domain name Nexus.com. We engaged in a discreet marketing process targeted at a pre-qualified list of global corporations. As a result, we have secured a formal, binding offer for the asset. He paused for effect, letting the weight of his words settle. Davies, the lawyer, was now pale, scribbling frantic notes. Marcus was leaning forward, his eyes narrowed. Isabel was frozen, her mind struggling to process what was happening. The offer, Mr. Chen continued, is from a publicly traded top 10 global technology conglomerate who wishes to remain anonymous until the conclusion of the sale. They intend to use the name for their new AI-driven enterprise platform, a project with a 10-figure development budget. They consider the Nexus.com domain to be a mission-critical component of their brand strategy. He looked from face to face through the camera, a doctor delivering a grave diagnosis. The standing, notarized offer for the clean and unencumbered transfer of Nexus.com is for $6,800,000 United States dollars. The number landed in the silent room like a physical object. It was so far beyond their comprehension, so completely outside the realm of what they had considered possible, that for a moment it didn't seem real. $6,800,000. Isabel made a small choking sound. Her perfectly applied mask of composure shattered. Her face went from disbelief to horror to a desperate, sickening understanding of the magnitude of her mistake. The domain she had laughed at, the sentimental nonsense she had given away out of spite, the asset she had tried to bully back for a pittance, was worth more than the entire yearly profit of the firm she had fought so hard to take. Marcus's face, which had been red with anger, was now a ghastly, mottled gray. He looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. All the air went out of him. His entire worldview, built on the idea that he was the smartest, most powerful man in any room, had just been demolished by a single number. Davies, the lawyer, dropped his pen. It rolled across the polished table and fell to the floor with a soft clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. He was staring at Liam, his expression a mixture of awe and terror. He had just threatened a man who was about to become a multi-millionaire on behalf of clients who had just revealed themselves to be spectacular fools. That's impossible," Isabel whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's a word. It's just a word." Liam looked at her, and for the first time she saw not anger, but a profound sadness in his eyes. "It was never just a word to me, Isabel. It was a vision you never tried to see. Value isn't just about what something is, it's about what it can become. You only ever saw me for what I was, never for what I could be." He then delivered the final, devastating blow. He gestured to the screen. "Mr. Chen's client's offer is, of course, contingent on receiving a clean title, free of any legal challenges or disputes. Your letter, Mr. Davies, and your threats today have placed that in jeopardy. Every day you pursue this baseless claim, you are actively obstructing a $6.8 million transaction." The implication was clear and terrifying. They weren't just losing an opportunity, they were now the direct cause of a potential multi-million-dollar loss. Liam wasn't just defending himself, he was now in a position to sue them for damages if their actions scuttled the deal. The power dynamic in the room hadn't just shifted, it had been inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. The hunters had become the hunted, the giants had become the insects, and Liam, the man they had sought to crush, was now standing on a mountain they didn't even know existed, looking down. The quiet bomb had detonated, and the fallout was just beginning. The immediate aftermath was a symphony of desperation. The carefully constructed facade of Thorne Power crumbled into dust in a matter of seconds. Marcus Thorne, a man used to commanding every room he entered, was the first to break. He surged to his feet, his face purple with a mixture of rage and panic. "This is a trick, a lie," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at the screen where Mr. Chen remained impassive. "You hired an actor. This is fraud." Mr. Chen did not react to the outburst. He simply looked at Liam, awaiting his cue. Liam, in contrast, remained seated, the calm center of the storm he had created. "Mr. Chen," he said, his voice cutting through Marcus's tirade, "would you mind emailing a copy of the notarized offer letter with the buyer's name redacted for confidentiality to Mr. Davies' official email address? I believe he has it from our previous correspondence." "Of course, Mr. Finch," Mr. Chen replied smoothly. "It's on its way." A moment later, a notification pinged on the laptop Davies had set up. He fumbled to open it, his hands shaking. His eyes scanned the document. He saw the letterhead of the prestigious brokerage firm, the legal jargon, the specified amount, the notary's seal. It was undeniably authentic. He looked up from his screen, his face ashen. "It's real," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "It's all real." Marcus stared at his lawyer, then back at Liam, his blustering rage deflating into sputtering disbelief. He sank back into his chair, looking suddenly old and frail. Isabel's reaction was different. Her shock morphed into a frantic, desperate attempt to rewind time, to undo the catastrophic miscalculations she had made. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a pleading, horrified expression. She leaned across the table, her hands outstretched as if to physically pull back the words she had spoken. "Liam, wait," she said, her voice cracking. "Liam, we can fix this. This is a mistake. That domain, it was part of our dream. Nexus. It was always meant for the firm, for us. I was angry. I didn't mean what I said." The appeal to their shared history, the us, was so stunningly hypocritical that Liam almost felt a flash of pity for her. Almost. He looked at her, his expression unyielding. "There is no us, Isabel. You made that perfectly clear. And you did mean what you said. You called it sentimental nonsense. You mocked it. You gave it away because you thought it was worthless. And you wanted me to have something worthless to remember you by. The only mistake you made was in your valuation." "But it's a marital asset," she insisted, her voice rising with hysteria. "You developed the idea while we were married. I have a claim. We have a claim." Liam's lawyer, Elena Rios, who had been sitting silently beside him, finally spoke. Her voice was sharp as a scalpel. "Ms. Thorne, your own signature is on a legal document that explicitly relinquishes any and all claims to this asset. If you attempt to pursue this fraudulent claim now, after the asset's value has been revealed, not only will you be countersued for malicious prosecution and tortious interference with a contract, but we will also file for sanctions against your counsel for bringing a frivolous lawsuit. Your legal position is not just weak, it is non-existent." Davies looked at Elena, then at his clients, a man who looked like he'd had a stroke, and a woman on the verge of a complete breakdown. He slowly closed his laptop. His role as an aggressor was over. Now his only job was to mitigate the cataclysmic damage. Isabel ignored him. Her eyes were fixed on Liam, filled with a terrifying cocktail of regret, fury, and a dawning awareness of her own self-inflicted wound. "You did this to me," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You let me do this. You sat back and watched me make this mistake just to humiliate me." Liam finally allowed a flicker of his true feelings to show, a cold, righteous anger. "No, Isabel, I didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself. You had a partner who valued ideas and vision. You threw him away. You had a business built on creativity. You tried to turn it into a monument to your own ego. You had an asset worth millions in your hands, and you threw it away out of spite. This isn't my victory. This is the consequence of your own character." He stood up, gathering the manila envelope. "The offer for Nexus.com is contingent on a swift and clean sale. Mr. Chen's client will not wait for you to invent new legal fantasies. You have 24 hours to have your lawyer send my lawyer a signed declaration stating that you withdraw all claims and will not interfere in any way with the sale of this asset. If I do not receive it, the deal may be lost. And if that happens," he paused, letting the final words land with surgical precision, "I will hold you and your father personally liable for every single dollar." He nodded to Elena, and they turned and walked out of the boardroom. They left behind the wreckage, a stunned lawyer, a broken old man, and a woman who had just discovered that in her quest to win everything, she had lost the one thing that truly mattered, and had handed her greatest enemy the power to ruin her completely. The echo of the closing door was the sound of her world collapsing. The 24 hours that followed the meeting were a frantic, desperate scramble for Isabel and Marcus. The signed declaration Liam had demanded arrived at Elena Rios's office with 3 hours to spare. It was a document of pure surrender, a legal white flag stripped of all the arrogant posturing that had defined their approach. The fight was over. The war was lost. With the legal threat removed, The sale of Nexus.com proceeded with astonishing speed. Mr. Chen's firm handled everything. Liam had to do little more than sign the final transfer documents via a secure digital portal. 1 week after the boardroom confrontation, he woke up, checked his newly opened private banking account, and saw a number that seemed to belong to another reality. After brokerage fees and taxes, the balance read $4,572,810.34. He stared at it for a long time. It wasn't the giddy excitement he had expected. It was a profound, quiet sense of peace. It was the feeling of solid ground beneath his feet for the first time in years. It wasn't just money, it was freedom. It was independence. It was the final, irrefutable validation of his own worth. A worth that had nothing to do with who he had married or whose father had funded his business. The consequences for Isabel and Marcus began to unfold almost immediately. The story, as stories of such spectacular hubris often do, began to leak. It started as whispers in the high-end legal and business circles of the city. A lawyer lets a detail slip to a colleague over lunch. A junior member of Thorn Creative staff, disillusioned by Isabel's tyrannical leadership, confides in a friend. Within a month, it was an open secret. The story was just too good, too perfectly ironic to stay quiet. The arrogant heiress who, in a fit of spite, gave her ex-husband a lottery ticket she thought was a grocery receipt. Marcus Thorn, the corporate titan, outsmarted and humiliated by the son-in-law he had always dismissed as a lightweight. The damage to their reputations was immense. Thorn Creative, the branding agency built on an image of savvy and foresight, became a laughingstock. How could a firm that advised others on value fail to recognize a multi-million-dollar asset in its own backyard? Potential clients grew wary. A major contract they were close to signing was suddenly put on hold indefinitely. The young, hungry talent Isabel had hired began circulating their resumes, not wanting to be associated with such a colossal failure of judgment. Isabel's social standing, which she had prized above all else, evaporated. The fawning praise on her social media was replaced by a deafening silence. The friends who had celebrated her new beginning now avoided her calls. At a charity event she forced herself to attend, she felt the chill in the air. People would stop talking when she approached. She could feel their pity, and worse, their schadenfreude. She had built her identity on the idea of being a winner, and now she was the city's most famous loser. The relationship between her and her father fractured under the strain. Marcus could not look at his daughter without seeing the $6.8 million she had thrown away. His pride was wounded beyond repair. He had enabled her, coddled her, taught her that their wealth and name made them invincible. Now, that very arrogance had led to their most public and humiliating defeat. Their conversations became stilted, full of blame and resentment. The invincible Thorn dynasty had been brought low, not by a rival corporation, but by the quiet, underestimated man they had cast out. One evening, about 2 months after the sale, Isabel sat alone in the vast, sterile white office she had designed. The neon art on the wall seemed to mock her with its bright, empty slogans. She looked at the plans for Thornflow, the project that had started it all. It was dead in the water. They had never found a suitable name, and now the budget had been frozen. The project was a monument to her failure. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Liam's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. What would she even say? I'm sorry? I was wrong? I ruined us? The words felt like ash in her mouth. She had spent a decade systematically dismantling his confidence, belittling his dreams, and rewriting their history to cast herself as the hero. There was no apology that could bridge that chasm. She thought of the man she had married, the quiet, thoughtful architect who saw connections and beauty where others saw nothing. The man who had believed in a word, nexus, for 12 years. She had seen it as a weakness, a sign of his foolish sentimentality. She realized now, with devastating clarity, that it had been his greatest strength. It was his faith in his own vision, a faith she had tried and failed to extinguish. She threw the phone across the room. It clattered against the glass wall and fell to the floor. She put her head in her hands and, for the first time since the divorce, she wept. Not tears of rage or self-pity, but the hard, painful tears of genuine regret. It was the beginning of a long, lonely reckoning in a life that was now, finally, truly her own. 6 months later, the city was moving into the crisp beauty of autumn. The leaves were turning, a natural cycle of letting go and starting anew. For Liam Finch, the metaphor was not lost. He had not used his newfound wealth in any of the ways Isabel or her father might have predicted. There was no fleet of sports cars, no penthouse apartment, no ostentatious displays of revenge. His life from the outside looked remarkably similar to how it had been, only calmer, more centered. He had moved out of the small, temporary apartment, but not into a mansion. He bought a modest but beautifully designed loft in a converted warehouse district, a space with good bones, high ceilings, and incredible natural light. It was a space an architect would love. He filled it with books, with art from local artists, and with the quiet satisfaction of a life built on his own terms. He had founded a new company. He didn't try to build an empire. He called it Finch and Partners, and it consisted of him and two other seasoned professionals he respected. Their mission was not to chase massive corporate clients, but to act as strategic consultants for promising startups and nonprofits, the kinds of organizations with great ideas but limited resources. He structured his compensation in a way that often involved taking a small equity stake instead of a large fee. He wasn't just working for money anymore. He was investing in visions he believed in. One of his first investments was in a young entrepreneur, a brilliant software engineer with an idea for a platform that would connect artisans in developing countries directly with global buyers. Her idea was powerful, but her business plan was a mess. Liam saw the potential. He spent weeks mentoring her, helping her refine her brand, her strategy, her pitch. He saw himself in her, the raw passion and the vision that just needed a bit of structure to take flight. He named her company Fulcrum, the point on which a lever rests to move a great weight. It was his new philosophy in action. He rarely thought of Isabel or Marcus. They existed in a different universe now, one defined by status, appearances, and the bitter memory of what they had lost. His universe was defined by creation, connection, and the quiet joy of building something meaningful. He had learned the most important lesson of his life, that true wealth has nothing to do with a bank balance. It is the freedom to live in alignment with your own values. It is the power to say no to what diminishes you and yes to what elevates you. It is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth, even when no one else can see it. He had won, but he didn't feel like a victor in a war. He felt like a survivor who had finally reached a safe shore. The anger had dissipated, replaced by a kind of serene wisdom. He understood that Isabel's cruelty had not been about him at all. It was a reflection of her own deep-seated insecurity, a product of a life where worth was always external, measured in money, status, and the approval of others. He felt a distant, impersonal pity for her. She had been trapped in a prison of her own making, and in her attempt to lock him in it with her, she had inadvertently handed him the key to his own escape. The story of Liam Finch and Nexus.com became a quiet legend, a modern fable for the digital age. It was a story about the hidden value in the things people discard. It was a story about the immense power of patience and the quiet dignity of a person who refuses to be broken. It's a reminder that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest, and that true strength lies not in dominance, but in integrity. And so we come to the end of our story, but the lesson remains. How many times in our own lives do we underestimate people or ideas based on appearances? How often do we dismiss something as sentimental nonsense when it might just be the seed of something incredible? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What did you take away from Liam's story? Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found this story of vindication and quiet triumph satisfying, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more content that celebrates the underdog and the power of integrity. Until next time, remember to look for the hidden value, both in the world and in yourself.